Major human rights controversies sharply divide public opinion. World on Trial brings together the world's best jurists, lawyers, and experts to present two sides of these controversies.
This is a very complex debate.
You will learn about the international treaties that emerged in the aftermath of World War II, in which nations around the world agreed for the first time in history to protect the fundamental human rights of their citizens. Along with jurors at universities around the world, you will determine whether nations today are living up to these promises. Welcome to World on Trial. On the morning of September 2, 2004, Muslim schoolgirls in France awoke to an unfamiliar world. A world in which wearing headscarves to school as a symbol of their religious identity was now illegal. A new law in France prohibited wearing any sort of conspicuous religious symbol while attending public elementary or secondary school. The law has become known as the Headscarf Law because of the impact it has had on Muslim schoolgirls. The punishment Muslim schoolgirls faced for disobeying was, and still is, expulsion from school. These girls who feel that they can no longer practice their faith believe France is infringing upon their right to religious freedom. And for this, they are putting France on trial.
Islam is the second largest religion in France, and France's Muslim population is the largest in Western Europe. In 1830, France invaded Algeria and ruled the predominantly Muslim country until 1962, when after an 8-year war, Algeria won its independence from France. During labor shortages in the 1960s, immigrants from across North Africa continued to enter France in large numbers. It was the French assumption that North Africans would return home after working for some years in France, but instead many remained. Today, nearly 10% of people living in France are Muslim, and estimates are that 20 to 30% of the French population under 25 is Muslim. France has a long history of commitment to secularism embodied in the word laïcité, freedom from religion. This uniquely French notion developed in the late 1800s as a response to the long domination of French life and government by the Catholic Church. In 1905, the French concept of laïcité was enshrined in the French law on the separation of churches and the state. Today in France, laïcité is a concept fundamental to the Republic, and to many implies a strict separation of private religious practice from public life. In 2003, the French government created the Stasi Commission with the stated purpose of making recommendations on preserving laïcité in an increasingly multicultural society. The Commission issued 26 recommendations, but only one was taken up by the National Assembly and considered for legislation. The prohibition in public schools of displaying ostentatious symbols of religious affiliations.
J'estime que le port de tenue...
In all good conscience, I believe that the wearing of outfits or signs that in an ostentatious manner show a religious affiliation have to be banned in public schools.
Secularism is undoubtedly the separation of the church and the state, and it is the miracle of secularism that allows us to live in national unity and with the respect of diversity.
Proposed law passed overwhelmingly and is commonly known as the Headscarf Ban because of its direct effect on Muslim girls.
In schools where some Muslim girls do wear the headscarf and others do not, there is strong pressure on the latter to conform. This daily pressure takes different forms, from insults to violence. In the view of the mostly male aggressors, these girls are bad Muslims, whores. Either we left the situation as it was, and thus supported a situation that denied freedom of choice to those, the very large majority, who do not want to wear the headscarf, or we endorsed a law that removed freedom of choice from those who do want to wear it. Complete freedom of choice for all was unfortunately not an offer.
Je pense que c'est une bonne chose parce que déjà je pense que le voile.
I think the law is a good thing because for me the headscarf is the symbol of women's submission. To wear the scarf in a secular place is contrary to the democratic spirit of France.
Démocratique de la France.
The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which France has signed, ensures the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and the right to manifest in public one's religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. According to the law's opponents, France has violated its own human rights obligations.
Le CFCM, Conseil français du culte musulman, regrette.
The CFCM, French Council of the Muslim Faith, regrets that the Stasi Commission presents a new vision of secularism, which reduces the guarantee of religious freedom.
La garantie des libertés religieuses.
The proposed law is an unwarranted infringement on the right to religious practice. For many Muslims, wearing a headscarf is not only about religious expression, it is about religious obligation.
Apparently, the headscarf bothers the school administration, the teachers, but not the students. It does not bother the students. I think it's a shame, because wearing the headscarf does not stop a girl from learning at school. I think everybody has their own religion, and they have to be able to practice it.
Therein lies the debate. The Covenant allows countries to limit these rights when necessary to protect public safety, order, health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. Is the headscarf ban an acceptable measure to ensure these rights? Or is it an unlawful infringement on the fundamental right of freedom of religion and therefore a violation of the covenant agreed to by France?
Many believe that the 2004 French law prohibiting conspicuous religious symbols in public schools violates an international human rights treaty known as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Nations that signed this treaty agree to protect freedom of religion, including the right to manifest one's religious belief publicly. France has signed this treaty. Others believe that the 2004 headscarf law is completely proper. The same treaty that obligates nations to protect religious freedom also permits them to restrict the right to manifest one's religious belief publicly if the restriction is necessary to protect public safety, health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. These are the opposing ideas we will debate today on World on Trial. Our judge today is the Honorable Sherry Booth, a noted human rights barrister and the former First Lady of Great Britain. Charles Ogletree, noted American trial attorney and Harvard Law School professor, leads the challenge to the 2004 French law. Remy Schwartz, a member of France's Conseil d'État, or State Council, and rapporteur of the Stasi Commission that recommended the 2004 law, leads the defense. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Sherry Booth.
Please be seated. Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening to counsel and to you members of the jury here in our courtroom and, of course, to the members of the jury around the world. You are about to participate as decision makers in the trial of a 2004 French law that prohibits students in public, elementary and secondary schools from wearing signs or dress that overtly manifests a religious affiliation. The question we must consider is whether this law is permissible under the international treaty known as the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights, to which France is a party. This human rights treaty protects the rights of individuals to manifest their religious beliefs in public, but it also protects the rights of nations to restrict religious freedom, if necessary, to protect public safety, order, health, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. Mr. Ogletree, are you ready to proceed with the challenge to the 2004 law?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I'd like to call John Bowen as the first witness.
Professor Bowen?
Good evening, Mr. Bowen. Could you explain your background and your experience?
I'm an anthropologist, and beginning in 2000, I studied in France the relationships between Muslims and the state.
Can you explain the arguments that the French government used for these laws and whether wearing headscarves have caused any problems in France?
Yes. We really have to go back to the beginning of this argument, which is 1989. There had been girls wearing headscarves, and no one paid any notice. But in the fall of 1989, when 3 girls tried to enter their middle school wearing headscarves, there was a great uproar. They were refused entry. There was a huge debate in France. Why 1989? It was about politics and fear. It was the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was the year when the Ayatollah Khomeini put out his death threat against Salman Rushdie. People were looking around for a new enemy, and they found it in Islam, and the easiest target was these 3 girls. The State Council, when asked to rule on the matter, said, citing the International Covenant on Social and Political Rights, as well as the French constitutions, that as long as these girls did not disrupt normal school life, they had the right of religious freedom, they had the right to wear these headscarves. Whenever, for political reasons, it was in the interest of politicians to drum up fear about international Islam and local social problems, they would turn back to the headscarf issue. Politicians and people in the media continued to try to drum up fears of Islamists at your doorstep. Finally, during the debates in the National Assembly, the beginning of 2004, what you heard from politicians of both sides was calls to send the Islamists a message. This law was all about opposing Islam in a way that was very, very easy, targeting those girls.
Has the wearing of headscarves caused any trouble in France?
Well, despite much effort to find such causal relations, no one really has been able to do so. There were a number of very good studies by French sociologists in the 1990s and 2000s looking at why many young women chose to wear headscarves. These sociologists, who were largely ignored by the government commissions, pointed out that women chose to wear a headscarf for one of 2 reasons. One, they decided they could be a better Muslim, they could better worship God by taking on a headscarf. The second reason was also as a way to negotiate their own liberation from what was often a patriarchal, oppressive environment, basically showing, okay, Mom and Dad, I can be a good Muslim and I can go on to university. Now, there are many problems of violence in France where very often men do oppress women, but nobody has ever been able to show that somehow putting on a headscarf causes violence. It's a claim that's often made, but it has no proof.
To what extent is this a burden on young women from your point of view if they have to abide by this law?
Well, we have no way of quantifying this. We know that there was a vastly increased demand for private religious schools after the passage of the law. It's been very difficult for these schools to start because you have to do it with your own resources. Some women may have decided to leave school early. Some women may have left France. But others have said, well, I'm going to go to the school. I'm going to take off my headscarf when I do so. It's very hard to know what sort of cost this has, this sort of order to put aside your religious beliefs. But we do know that many women feel continually targeted by the government as if they're the causes of all the social problems in France, rather than some of the men, some of the government agencies that fail to help them.
Thank you very much, Professor Bowen.
Mr. Schwartz, your cross-examination.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Does this law apply only to Muslims?
No, the law as stated says that anybody wearing a religious sign which shows in an obvious way his or her religious affiliation may not wear it in a public school.
So it applies to all students? It forbids Jewish students from wearing yarmulke and Christian students from wearing large crosses?
That's right.
Thank you.
Mr. Schwartz, your first witness?
I would like to introduce Karima Benoun.
Bonjour, madame.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Karima Benoun. I'm a professor of international law and human rights at the Rutgers School of Law in Newark. I used to be a legal advisor for Amnesty International. My areas of specialty are human rights, women's rights, and in particular, women's rights vis-a-vis religious extremism. I am of Algerian heritage and come on my father's side from an Algerian Muslim family.
Merci, madame.
Thank you. Could you tell us why, in your opinion, the French government did not violate Section 18 of the Covenant?
I think this is a very important question. Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights indeed guarantees freedom of religion, but the manifestation of one's religion also has an impact on others in society. And so that aspect of the right is dealt with under Article 18.3, which allows for exceptions to the right to manifest one's religion. Those exceptions are subject to 3 requirements. The first is that they must be prescribed by law. That's clearly the case here. The second is that they must be necessary, which often is understood to mean proportional to the value being protected. And the third is that they have to be in the interest of protecting a particular value, such as health, morals, or I think what is at stake here, namely the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. And in fact, one of the most important constituencies in France supporting the 2004 law was indeed Muslim girls who choose not to cover and who feared that they would be pressured into wearing more and more restrictive garments in school in the absence of a law like this. When I went to France and conducted field research in the Muslim population, what many women and girls told me is that prior to the adoption of this law, it was the law of the brothers, as they called it, which was prevailing. That is to say, the law of community leaders, in particular fundamentalist community leaders, some fathers and brothers, that was coercing women into wearing restrictive garments, including the headscarf. And what they felt was that the French state needed to enact this law precisely to give them a free sphere in public education where they would not be coerced to wear these sorts of garments.
Can you give us some examples of pressure being placed on girls in town and school by their older brothers? What kind of clothing were they expected to wear?
These claims have escalated, beginning with the headscarf, moving on from there to a loose cloak that covers the whole body, sometimes even escalating to demands to cover the face. Many of the women and girls, Muslim women and girls who support the law, in fact, precisely fear that if the headscarf is allowed in school, then the fundamentalists will make more and more claims for more and more restrictive garments. Not being veiled is a condition that has had very negative consequences in certain circumstances for some Muslim women and girls. They have faced violence, threats. Not having these sorts of symbols in the public schools, in fact, then enables an environment where everyone is equal. And please remember that what we're talking about here are some classrooms in France where most of the pupils will, in fact, be Muslim. So the issue is not just one between Islam and the West, as perhaps the other side likes to frame this issue, but the debate among Muslims themselves, many of whom reject the notion that the headscarf is in any way prescribed by the religion Islam.
Et que disent aujourd'hui les associations?
And what do the Muslim women's group you've encountered say about this issue?
It is a very diverse population, like any other population, but there are important organizations among Muslims or with a large Muslim membership that support the law. For example, SOS Racism, which is a very important anti-racist organization in France, Ni Pute Ni Soumise, which is a very important women's rights organization in France that has a very significant membership and leadership from the Algerian immigrant population, supports the law precisely to act as a counterweight to fundamentalist pressure on women. Xenophobia and racism are very real issues. Discrimination against women is a real issue, and the problem of rising fundamentalism inside the Muslim population in France is also a very real issue.
So, in conclusion, major anti-racism organizations, immigration organizations, and organizations for the protection of Muslim women, all these major organizations have the same position on this issue.
I think there's a strong argument to be made that probably the majority of what is called the Muslim population in France supports the law. In fact, remember that Muslims, just like anyone else, some are practicing, some are not practicing, and they have a wide variety of views about how to practice their religion. So the assumption that all Muslim girls want to wear the headscarf is a false assumption. We also have to think about the rights here of Muslim women and girls who want to choose not to wear these garments and want their rights to be protected by the state. How they framed this to me was the idea of the law of the Republic versus the law of the brothers.
Merci.
Mr. Ogletree.
Good evening. You oppose Islamophobia and also xenophobia and racism, is that correct?
Absolutely.
And they should be eliminated in every possible way.
Absolutely. I believe that all forms of discrimination are equally important as human rights concerns.
And not everyone wants to choose to not wear the veil, is that correct?
Certainly.
And in fact, the idea of religious expression is that you can express it in any way that you want to.
The right to express one's religion is subject to limitations. Manfred Novak, in his authoritative commentary on the ICCPR, has indicated that if you allow overly broad freedom to manifest religion, that has very dire impacts on the right of religious freedom of others. But there are limits. Those limits are built into human rights law to protect the rights of others.
And there are girls in France today who want and who choose to wear the religious veil, but they cannot. Is that correct, based on this law?
They cannot in school. They certainly can put it on again when they leave the borders of the school.
And that is a restriction on the expression of their religion
I think,
when they are in school. Is
I
that
think
correct?
For some of them, it's religious expression. That's another debate that we haven't had. But it might be more useful, actually, sir, if you let me answer your question.
The questions are yes and no.
I'm not going. This is a very complex debate that can't be dealt with through yes or no questions.
There are girls who cannot wear the veil under the French law now in school, even though that's part of their religious expression. Isn't that the law?
Yes, it's the same with people who cannot wear kippas, people who cannot wear turbans, Sikhs.
And so there are limits on expression of religion.
While at school.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Just one more question. In the courtroom today, you didn't wear everyday clothing. You didn't wear whatever you wanted. And myself, I put on a suit and tie. I didn't wear clothing that I might normally wear. I also didn't wear any religious symbols. Do you feel that we are being discriminated against while we are in this court?
I think that's a very good question. I think in many contexts, people have to wear clothing that is appropriate to those contexts. Indeed, if you look at the American public school system, there are a number of limitations on dress code here, certain symbols that may be expressions of people's beliefs that we do not allow. Just to give one example, the Confederate flag, which is found to be very offensive by many people, and others would say it is an expression of their political beliefs, and I think rightly we accept limitation on the wearing of that symbol. There are context-specific dress requirements, and I don't think most of them are discriminatory.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz, your next witness.
Your Honor, allow me to call my witness, Miss Hanifa Sherifi. Madame, would you introduce yourself to the court?
I am the Inspector General of National Education in France, so I oversee educational matters, and for 10 years I was a national mediator for issues involving the Islamic veil. I'm very involved in the integration of immigrant populations in France.
Are you of Muslim culture?
Yes, I am of Algerian origin. I was very young, 9 years old, when my parents and I arrived in France as immigrants. I was enrolled in school for the first time in France. I come from the Muslim cultural sphere. I belong to a Muslim family.
Thank you. Until now, we have discussed this issue as outsiders. We understand some outside perspectives, but because of your background, you can speak from an inside perspective when talking about these young women. Can you tell me why the French government passed this law in 2004?
Well, first, I want to say that North African, that is, Muslim immigration to France, had been taking place for over a century. Algerian immigration had been taking place for over a century, but the phenomenon of the Islamic veil only appeared in France in 1989. No one had seen this type of veil before. Immigrants did not bring this veil. It was a completely new phenomenon. Even in Muslim countries outside of France, outside of Western civilization, the veil has only appeared recently. With the arrival of fundamentalist Islam came women having to wear an outfit, a uniform, to differentiate themselves from men and to limit their freedom of movement. This is the chador. The Islamic veil appeared in North Africa and then in France. So this is a completely new, misunderstood phenomenon among Muslim populations themselves. Fundamentalist currents created this problem. Veils began to appear in schools at that time, near the end of the 80s. This phenomenon grew tremendously under pressure from religious leaders who pervaded neighborhoods, ghettos, as some would call them, and also pressure from two organizations advocating that women wear the veil in order to symbolize their differences from other women and to reduce their freedom.
You have personally spoken with and worked with these young women.
Oui, alors pendant 10 ans, yes, for 10 years I've been a mediator and I've worked with schools and we've tried several methods to deal with this issue. We've tried to stop the pressure to wear the veil. For 15 years, we've tried to address this issue of pressure to veil, not only because of secular Islamic relations, but because it was an attack on the freedom of these girls. The veil discriminates against women. If a girl chooses not to wear the veil, she is discriminated against both by men and by other women who choose to wear it. These veiled young girls were being told that if they wore the veil, they were more virtuous than the girls who did not. Those who refused to wear the veil were persecuted in their neighborhoods. They were forced to wear it. Their families came to see me since I was a mediator and came to see school administrators. They told us that their children are subjected to this pressure from fundamentalists, and this has nothing to do with their own Islamic practices. Therefore, after 15 years, the state chose another method to end this curse, which was threatening these girls' freedom. And this is how the law came into being after a very widespread public debate.
Out of the roughly 2 million Muslim students in France, how many expulsions from public school were there in 2004-2005?
Since the implementation of the law, we've had exactly 44 cases of expulsion that involved veiled girls. They were expelled from school for refusing to obey the law, but they were not prevented from receiving their education. After these expulsions, the girls were reintegrated into their studies through correspondence. Today, we no longer have this problem. I mean, Islam has lost its battle against freedom for women since today girls are educated in great numbers. Families, Islamic organizations in France, all are in favor of this law because it guarantees equality between men and women. And it's a law that guarantees free movement for women, especially at school, where they no longer face discrimination.
Thank you.
Mr. Ogletree?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening. Any form of discrimination should be prohibited in France. Do you agree?
Yes, of course.
Let me ask you about what is allowed in France. Men are able to wear hats.
Absolutely. Men are allowed to wear hats.
Women can wear makeup.
Oui. Yes.
Women and men can wear symbols of religious faith.
That is correct.
And women can wear pants or suits without any form of discrimination against what they wear.
That is correct.
And the only law that you have that restricts the freedom of a man or a woman is a law about headscarves. Is that correct?
The law discriminates against the veil, but not against women. Let's be clear. The law is about conspicuous religious symbols. A student has the right to wear a religious symbol, unlike national politicians who are strictly prohibited from doing so. All students have the right to express their religion, just not in a conspicuous manner. So the yarmulke is forbidden. The Islamic veil is forbidden. The turban is also forbidden. And obviously big crosses are forbidden. So anything that is obvious and that separates students is prohibited. However, anything that is worn discreetly is acceptable, regardless of religious symbolism.
If you can't afford to go to a private school, then you can't wear the veil. Is that correct?
The French government provides all families with the right to send their children to school to be educated free of charge.
So can I just clarify that there's no charge at all for the private schools or for the correspondence courses, no expenses?
Private schools that are subsidized by the state are very moderately priced. And there are private schools that are not subsidized and do cost more money, but that cost is moderate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've heard the defense contend that the 2004 law is necessary to protect Muslim girls who wish not to veil from being forced to by fundamentalist pressures. Let's look again at the law that was described by Justice Booth, Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 167 nations, including France, have agreed to abide by the terms of this treaty. We can see that under paragraph 1, all of these nations, including France, have agreed that everyone shall have the right to freedom of religion. And that freedom of religion shall include the right to publicly manifest one's religion or belief. So the treaty, it seems, protects the right to plainly show or reveal one's religion in public, as does a priest's collar, or a nun's habit, or a Jewish kippah or yarmulke, or a Sikh's long hair and turban, or a Christian's cross, or a Muslim woman's headscarf. But paragraph 3 of Article 18 of the treaty says that nations may enact laws restricting the freedom to publicly manifest one's religion in certain circumstances. Paragraph 3 permits restrictions on this right if the restriction is necessary to protect public safety, order, health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. The defense contends that the 2004 law is necessary to protect Muslim girls who wish not to veil from being forced to wear headscarves by fundamentalist fathers, brothers, and classmates. Let's see how the challengers respond in rebuttal.
Mr. Ogletree?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I'd like to call Whitney Brown. Ms. Brown, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your interest?
Yes, I'm an international human rights lawyer. I'm a senior director for international law and policy at Amnesty International, and one of my areas of expertise is women's rights.
When you look at this French law, can you tell me what it says about paternalism from your point of view?
Yes, let's be clear. The French government had an opportunity to live up to its ideal of respecting diversity. When it comes to the issue of paternalism, this is a huge issue in this particular case, because what we have is a state deciding that it wants to protect girls rather than empower girls. What the state should be doing is saying, of course, if there is any violence or coercion behind your decision to wear a headscarf, we are there to both address the violence in your family or your community, which is the responsibility of the state, because every girl in France has the right to be free from violence. But instead of doing that, they're not really addressing the violence. They're basically saying, we're going to protect you by imposing on you a way of dressing for school. In the end, what is happening, and it happens consistently around the world, is the bodies of girls and women become a battlefield for ideology. And the point is, no woman or girl's body should be a battlefield where what you wear or don't wear becomes a question for legislation, and you are punished, whether the punishment is putting at risk your right to education or the punishment is violence from your family and community.
It's interesting because the French government has stated reasons for these laws: public health, public safety, order, and even morals. Are those justifications satisfactory in your mind, or is this actually a burden on young women from your point of view?
I would say all those arguments fail. And what you actually have is a law that it's clear from the history behind it is discriminatory, and it's discriminatory specifically about Muslim girls.
Ms. Brown, thank you very much.
Mr. Schwartz, your witness.
Vous avez dit qu'il faut lutter contre l'islamophobie, la xénophobie.
You said that it's necessary to combat Islamophobia and xenophobia. But as an American, perhaps you don't know that French law already prohibits this. Since 1972, xenophobia and Islamophobia have been illegal. You may know that recently a minister from the French government was convicted for comments that promoted xenophobia and Islamophobia.
Yes, it's true that in the European context there are strong laws against that, but I think it's the question that we know always fails with laws, which is the difference between what is on the books and what in fact is implementation and practice.
Mr. Ogletree?
Yes. Ms. Brown, have we seen any indication at all that wearing of scarves anyway undermined the authority or the power or the order of the French government?
Well, as we saw in the video, a young girl saying, it seems to me it's all the adults in the schools that are upset, but nobody else is really upset. There's nothing that says you disrupt a classroom simply because you wear a headscarf or a yarmulke or a turban.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to both of you and to your witnesses for their very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentations. I'm now going to ask counsel for each side to present their closing arguments, summarising why, in their view, the evidence we've heard fits their case for the certain outcome under the International Covenant. So the sequence we're going to hear now is that the challenge to the law will proceed first, and then the response of the defence second. And we'll have 1 minute of the time allocated to the challenger for a final rebuttal at the end. So, Mr. Ogletree, are you ready to present your final argument?
Yes, Your Honour.
Please proceed.
Thank you. This is one of the most important issues that face our world today. We ask that you, as you decide this case, you do so without friend or favor, without bias or prejudice, for or against either side. Do it from a clear and clean and unambiguous application of the law. And let me tell you why you should rule in favor of giving these girls the freedom of expression, of conscience, and of religion. You heard the witnesses for the state argue that the law of the brothers overwhelmed the rights and interests of the women. But shouldn't the state of France be concerned about addressing the law of the brothers rather than punishing the women? Are they allowing the law of the brothers to dominate France at the expense of these young women? But the reality is that it's about your daughter and you and what it means today. It means that living in France should not add a special burden on you to express your religion, unlike any other burden on anyone else. And it means that as much as the right of the state is important, the state also has to respect and adhere to international covenants. A covenant is an agreement that the state will protect all of its citizens, not just men, not non-Muslims, but everyone. We're not asking for a punishment. We're not asking for a special exception. We're simply saying, do not single out Muslim women, girls who have no power themselves, if the law says everyone should be protected, and this law infringes upon the protection of those who need it the most.
Mr. Schwartz, it's your turn.
Merci, madame. Mesdames, Messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, France is an old country.
Vieux pays d'immigration.
This country has always welcomed the most varied and diverse populations because it's a free country. A country where everyone can live and believe what he or she wants.
Et croire ce qu'il veut.
We've long had a large Catholic community. We have proeminent Protestant churches and the first Jewish community in Europe.
Catholique.
But also, and for a long time now, we've had an Islamic presence. Islam is today, along with other religions, strong in France. It's the second largest religion in our country. France has Muslim chaplains in the army along with Catholic chaplains. And since the law of 1905, when the Republic of France forced the Catholic Church to accept other belief systems, everyone is free to believe or not to believe whatever he or she chooses. And since the law of 1905, when the French government separated itself from the Catholic Church in order to accept other belief systems, everyone has done what he or she wishes. We didn't just wake up one morning in 2004 and say to ourselves, well, today we're going to start discriminating against Muslims. The commission, convened by the President of the French Republic, brought together a diverse group of people. People from the right and from the left. Catholics, Muslims, Jews, Protestants, agnostics, people with diverse opinions. After a year of work, the Commission arrived at a unanimous proposal and created a ban. As Anifa Sherifi told us, after 15 years of discussion, it was time to say stop. Stop what's called the law of the brothers. There are girls, children, who came to us and said, protect us. We want to be free, free to wear skirts, free to wear pants, and if we don't want to wear scarves, we shouldn't have to. Protect us. We want to be able to go to school in peace. So, France unanimously said stop. We go to school to study, and we felt it was necessary to protect young girls from having to wear the veil. The few parents who didn't accept this could place their children in private schools, subsidized by the state. But if they attend public schools, there are rules. Just as in this courtroom, there are rules. We don't wear religious symbols. We don't display our religious convictions. It's a rule we respect, and yet we don't feel we are being discriminated against. France is a country where laws are constantly contested. And yet this law is not being contested. It's one of the rare laws that receives unanimous support within the country, including parts of the country where there are immigrants of the Muslim faith. In 2004, the head of the French Council of the Muslim Faith regretted the imposition of this law. He would have preferred to use dialogue. Today, however, the French Council of the Muslim Faith, which represents 6 million French Muslims, accepts this law. And if it's accepted in this unanimous fashion, it's because it's positive for Islam in France. Because it's a victory for democratic Islam against the tide of fundamentalists who want to impose their vision on others and isolate girls. It's also a victory for these young girls, these young women, who in fact called for the imposition of such a law. Young Muslim girls, immigrants, who asked for this protection from the state. Today, they come to say thank you. Thank you for helping us to be free.
Mr. Ogletree, your 1 minute.
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, my brother talks about protecting everyone, but in fact it discriminates against some. If one girl in France cannot wear that scarf because she wishes to wear it, because she's afraid of the law of the brothers, because she's fearful of the government, because her voice is in the wilderness, who will hear her? I ask that you hear that voice. That voice says, look out for me. I'm not in the majority. I'm not a man, but I have deep religious convictions. I want to worship my God. I want to be respected in my values. And I want the government to not tell me that I can't simply wear an article that I believe is fundamental to my religion. It's easy to go along with the majority. It's hard to defend the minority. But we can always imagine ourselves being in that position and wonder who will stand up for me, who will fight for justice, who will insist on equality in every circumstance if it's just me, just me.
At the conclusion of the trial, Justice Booth instructed the jury to consider all of the evidence carefully and fairly, and to decide the outcome according to the terms of Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. First, does the 2004 French law restrict the freedom to publicly manifest and practice one's religion? Second, even if the 2004 law does restrict the freedom of public school children to publicly manifest their religious beliefs, is the law nonetheless permissible because it is necessary to protect public safety, order, health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others? Including the jury in our courtroom today, we've convened 8 juries at leading universities around the world. All of these juries have closely watched the trial just as we have. Let's watch as the juries vigorously and thoughtfully debate the questions posed by Justice Booth.
I am deeply concerned that the French law is a slippery slope. We have all seen history. We know how innocuous sounding bits of legislation like this today can tomorrow lead to horrors.
If you're really interested in protecting people who may be subject to coercion or being forced, well then it seems to me that something along the lines of laws that we have to, in order to protect children from child abuse, right, would be more appropriate.
I don't think that they brought in the law to discriminate, but I think they brought in the law because it was necessary that everybody, that school children were treated equally.
It's
not generally speaking going to have a massive impact on the Christian population of France. It will do for Muslims because they have a lot more cultural associations with outward manifestations of the religion. So I feel that in terms of proportionality, it is hitting one group far harder than others.
Most of these girls are probably French citizens as well.
Yes.
And is there a way that if they say, well, this is how French society has been, but we want to redefine what it means to be French, how much should they be able to do that?
I felt like the actual issue was protecting women's rights, and addressing it through this law was an inappropriate method.
They can only avoid the law of the brothers for, what, 6 hours a day? And then, you know, when they go home, they've got to put it back on and all the rest of it.
They are avoiding the essential or fundamental question of violence that is going on in the Islamic communities, and they're kind of focusing or straying away from the main question and trying to say that they have to protect these Islamic girls' rights.
The argument of the French government sounds quite persuasive, like, you know, wearing a scarf might infringe upon other girls who choose not to wear a scarf. But I think the point is that, you know, like offending those girls who choose not to wear a scarf is not because of those girls who choose to wear a scarf, it's because of the law of the brothers.
Why French government introduced such a legislation? Because they want to give a chance to the Muslim girl who want to go to school without wearing a headscarf, you know.
By having such a law as in France, at least you give them the chance to go to school, because they can tell their brothers, we're not allowed to wear a headscarf. Everyone is happy with the law in France. It's only the world that is not happy with it.
If one person doesn't like this idea, it's a discrimination. If we are talking here about the human rights.
The only thing that I was hearing from the defense is a woman without scarf on her head is more free than a woman with a scarf on her head. And this is a mistaken conception.
Yes, exactly. It's the conflict between freedom of religion and freedom from religion. Even if they do leave the school, they will still have to wear that religious attire anyway. But maybe that gives them a sense of liberty that no other sphere will give them.
If we're trying to protect women or girls, I think the thing to do is to educate to norms, to tolerance, and I think what this law does is the absolute contrary. It really advocates against tolerance and diversity.
There is some sort of Islamophobia. People don't like the scarf, people either don't understand it, and it's interpreted as a symbol of oppression by most of the West.
The majority of French people support the law. Even if that were true, it's irrelevant to the argument about whether it's in contravention of the covenant or not. Because it doesn't matter how many people support the law, it's still a question, open question, whether that law is in conflict with the covenant.
The government has to protect citizens from being forced to wear things and being forced from discriminatory religious practices, but it also has to balance that out against the individual's right to their religious freedom. And I don't think that the French government has necessarily done that in this case. If anything, I think there seems to be a paternalistic judgment that is being made.
I don't see the connection between banning the headscarf outright and protecting people from being forced into it, because there's nothing to say that these brothers won't force people to still wear it, to drop out of school.
I think that in school we should be able to see it as a public sphere, so yes, we have something to say about it.
But is this
we have to protect this freedom to
Is it a solution to send them back home? Because this is what the government offers to them. I mean, if you don't want to go to public school, if you can't wear your headscarf at school, and they say this is to prevent the law of brothers, but if you prevent the law of brothers by sending them back to their brothers, what's the point?
This statute only focuses on the public school, but we cannot avoid this problem at all, because the fathers can choose to send them to the private school. They still face this problem. So actually, this statute does not work.
Because of the conception of secularism, and in a democratic society, everyone should respect the other's value. So there need to be a environment which is religious tolerance, that everyone can respect each other.
From the perspective of the French, they indeed have many justifications for this ban. But does this ban necessary to keep the value of the French, who consider that the religion is part of the moral, the morality, the part of the public health? I don't think so.
"11 of the 40 jurors around the world who watched the trial decided in favor of the validity of the 2004 French law banning conspicuous religious symbols in French public schools. 29 of the jurors decided that the law violates the religious freedom guarantees of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now it's time for you to register your decision. Please visit the World on Trial website to record your verdict and see the world's opinion take shape. I'm Randall Robinson, and I hope that you'll join us again for World on Trial.